With night 2 of the WWE Draft taking place tonight on Monday Night Raw, I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of reflect and review over the events of Friday Night SmackDown where the first night of the draft took place. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jose Ramos Jr. here on my channel where we talk professional wrestling on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And like I said, for the purpose of this video, we will be covering the draft night 1 of Friday Night SmackDown, looking through each pick and the events that have unfolded during that night. Looking at the draft picks of that night, I'd have to say I've always grown up a big fan of SmackDown. If you follow this channel and you follow the podcast, you would know that my family, my brother and I, we really grew up on Friday Night SmackDown. Then, at that time, it was on Thursdays. But that's where we got to see the likes of a Rey Mysterio, of an Undertaker, Booker T, Eddie Guerrero, John Cena, when he first got his start as well. So when the draft always comes around, obviously I want the show to succeed, whether it is SmackDown or Raw. But for me, I've always had that preference towards the SmackDown. And you look at the number 1 draft pick that they selected. Now, first, before we get into the draft picks, obviously we know that there were new rules implemented in this year's draft. And I don't know how the majority of fans are taking it, but for me personally, I enjoy it. I think it was a smart decision to have all champions protected in these picks. If you're a champion that was primarily associated with SmackDown, you will stay on that brand. And if you are a champion primarily that's associated with Raw, you would stay on that brand. I think it makes it a lot more cleaner. I think it makes it a lot more organized in terms of how the rosters are laid out. So with that being said, guys like a Cody Rhodes, like a Sami Zayn, like a Logan Paul, both sets of tag team champions, the women's champions, they will stay where they are as of this moment. So since the champions have already been predetermined on where they will be, the first draft pick in this year's draft was Bianca Belair, which I know a lot of fans, there's two different ends of the spectrum. Either you're a big fan of Bianca or you're not. Me personally, I fall in the line of big fan. I enjoy Bianca Belair's presence. I like her work in the ring as well as her presentation. If there's one way to compare her to a star from yesterday, it's John Cena. She's clearly become one of their go-to ambassadors for the company as to who they want representing them in the mainstream. And I think she's earned that right. Bianca Belair, I thought, was a tremendous pick. But the pick for me that really stood out in night 1 was Carmelo Hayes. Carmelo Hayes, of course, coming off of his feud with Trick Williams, who's now the newly crowned NXT champion, will now be joining Friday Night SmackDown. And to see him in the limelight with the likes of a Cody Rhodes, which we will get to in a moment, only proves the point that WWE is very high on Carmelo Hayes. I look forward to see what they do with him, how they move forward with his character, how they allow him to evolve, and what type of growth will we see him go throughout his career. And speaking of long careers and growth and evolution, Randy Orton, also selected to Friday Night SmackDown. He's not going anywhere. He was already associated with the blue brand. So to see him stick there is very cool. A lot of these picks, you will see, it's going to be individuals who were already pretty much presented on these brands. That's probably the one negative that I took from this show, is that there wasn't that many movement. You saw guys like an AJ Styles, like the Bloodline, like an LA Knight sticking with Friday Night SmackDown. And on the flip side, Raw is still keeping Seth Rollins. There's Jey Uso, Liv Morgan, Sheamus, the Alpha Academy, all acts that I enjoy, all acts that I appreciate. But there's no change. There really wasn't any movement. If we were to narrow it down just to the ones that changed, it's obviously those from NXT, like a Carmelo Hayes, which I've already mentioned. And Friday Night SmackDown also receives Andrade and Nia Jax, 2 stars from Monday Night Raw. Now, it's curious to see what they're going to do with Nia Jax, because she's already feuded with a Becky Lynch. She's already feuded with a Rhea Ripley, so this makes logical sense to send her over to Friday Night SmackDown, where she can feud with Bayley, essentially. And we kind of saw a hint of that during the events of Friday Night SmackDown, where she attacked Bayley, kind of sending a message to the women's locker room of Friday Night SmackDown, saying that she is a threat, that she is a force to be reckoned with. So I'm curious to see how they move on with Nia Jax. And as for Andrade, where does he fall into it, where it is the LWO versus the Legado del Fantasma. Now, of course, both of those factions will be eligible to be drafted tonight on Monday Night Raw, so there's a possibility they won't even be on Friday Night SmackDown. But to see the interaction between these two factions alongside an individual like Andrade, I'm curious to see where they move forward with that. And plus, you have to keep in mind that in the coming year, we're going to see Friday Night SmackDown move back to USA Network and Monday Night Raw going to Netflix. So for me, I think it only makes sense that Monday Night Raw is going to be selecting stars that they can depend on, and certainly stars that Netflix would like to see on their streaming service. That's why we have the likes of a Seth Rollins. That's why we have the likes of a Jey Uso. The one thing that I thought was interesting was Cody Rhodes moving to Friday Night SmackDown. Now you can argue that the deal with Netflix is already set, so they don't really have to add any upgrade to it. Of course, they want to incorporate stars like The Rock, like a Seth Rollins, etc. But then you look at SmackDown, who's still on cable television on USA Network, and you need to attract those viewers. Hence why Cody Rhodes is probably there, why the Bloodline stays there, and Roman Reigns still hasn't been assigned a roster. In fact, before the draft even began, Paul Heyman had announced that he was withdrawing himself from the draft pool. Essentially, you can look at it two different ways. Either he's staying on SmackDown or he's a free agent. They haven't announced which of those two theories it is. I personally would like to think that he's a free agent, that he could pop up on either brand whenever this takes place. But being that the Bloodline, guys like Solo Sikoa, guys like Paul Heyman, Tama Tonga, are on SmackDown, I'm inclined to believe he'll just be joining the Blue brand, not only to rekindle his feud with Cody Rhodes, but also to reassume his position as the tribal chief. Roman Reigns, along with everyone else, is a key part of these storylines. Everything revolves around him. So to see where he goes from here is very interesting. I don't think we'll see him back until probably SummerSlam down in Cleveland, Ohio, whether he is advertised or not. Either he will be advertised for a matchup or he'll make a return at that event. That's what I foresee happening. But we're sticking with the WWE Draft. And one name that I did not mention that was very interesting was a Kiana James, who was from NXT and is being called up to the Monday Night Raw brand. Now, for those who haven't seen a Kiana James, she's definitely been improving in ring. But a lot of things in NXT that is prevalent is the character work, the gimmicks. And as I mentioned, she's been improving. I thought it was a little bit of a surprise to see a Kiana James elevated to Monday Night Raw. I'm curious to see what they do with her as to where she falls in the pecking order of the division. But again, I trust in Triple H, I trust in Shawn Michaels to know what they're doing at this rate with the roster. And like I mentioned in previous episodes of the podcast as well as this channel, they haven't necessarily let me down as a fan. They keep me enthralled in these storylines, invested in these matches. So I'm very interested to see how they go about incorporating these new NXT stars. But as we head into Friday Night SmackDown and going through the segments, they opened up with the contract signing between AJ Styles and Cody Rhodes, which will be the WWE Championship matchup at the Backlash event. Now, for those who haven't seen the short video on my channel, go ahead and check it out. But AJ Styles does have a history with the Rhodes family. You go back all the way to 2003, where he actually defended the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Cody's father, Dusty Rhodes, in a bloody matchup that would see AJ Styles emerge victorious. But this is, in fact, the first matchup between Cody and AJ, which in itself is a very interesting matchup, being that these are two guys who helped revolutionize wrestling. And when I say that, you look at how Cody has distanced himself from the WWE, went to independent scene, went to Japan, Ring of Honor, helped create AEW, and then became so valuable in terms of a wrestler that he came back and demonstrated that, hey, you need to bet on yourself in order to become truly who you believe you can become, and that's a major star. Then you look at AJ Styles, who similarly was in WCW, it went out of business, and instead of going to WWE, or maybe he wasn't, hired by WWE due to his size, went to TNA, established himself as the guy there, won championship gold in every division, went to Japan, and then eventually came to WWE, both carving out different career paths, both members of the Bullet Club. So to see that this is the first time these two are actually going to be competing against one another is a very interesting matchup in itself. I, of course, with many others, we know Cody Rhodes is going to win. It's his first title defense. They're not going to have him drop this title after 1 month and just have the reign end like that. But how ironic, how funny would it be if that happens? It won't. I assure you it will not happen. The next segment, of course, was Rey Mysterio and Dragon Lee, both members of the LWO, facing off against Angel Garza and Humberto Carrillo of the Legado del Fantasma. The matchup itself was fun. It was fine. But what really was the takeaway from this segment was the reveal of who attacked Dragon Lee. And to not the surprise of many, it was Carlito. Carlito being the one that attacks Dragon Lee in hopes of gaining that spot in the WrestleMania matchup. And the ongoing joke around the internet is that what is up with Rey Mysterio and having his partners, his friends, turn on him? You look at guys like Eddie Guerrero, Batista, Carlito, Santos Escobar, even his own son Dominic. Rey Mysterio is too much of a pure babyface to not recognize his own flaws and having all these people turn on him. But you see the progression that this story has taken. To see how Rey Mysterio has created a new family, essentially, now that Dominic had strayed away to the Judgment Day. And in doing so, he invited outsiders like a Dragon Lee, like a Kalisto, or excuse me, like, not a Dragon Lee or Kalisto, Carlito. So to have him come in and kind of take away that shine from a Santos Escobar, that would explain why he would become jealous and become green with envy and attack those members of the LWO. Simultaneously, when it came time for WrestleMania and we were going to announce who Rey Mysterio's partner was against Santos Escobar and Dominic, naturally people thought it was going to be Carlito, but instead, no, he invites a new member in Dragon Lee. Carlito then becomes jealous, and how can you blame him? We all thought it was going to be Dragon Lee, but essentially it becomes Andrade. It's a natural progression, it's a logical explanation, and it makes sense. But the way they teased it, Carlito's not going to be joining Legado, and he's certainly not with the LWO. So there's another side quest here for Rey Mysterio and how he's going to combat not only the Legado del Fantasma, but also Carlito. Will it lead to a match at Backlash? I don't know. It's a quick turnaround, but I wouldn't be surprised if that occurred. Fast forward, we look at Braun Breaker, who, like I mentioned, is being drafted to Monday Night Raw. And what I think, again, one of the better draft picks of this year's draft. Carmelo's going to headline SmackDown. Braun Breaker's going to be for Raw. And I very much look at it reminiscent of 2005, where you had Batista and John Cena on two different brands. These are going to be the two figureheads of an era, of a generation. I genuinely believe we will see Braun Breaker as a world champion soon rather than later, and Carmelo Hayes has already demonstrated why he is that guy, why he is him. I love the presentation of Braun Breaker, especially because they're presenting him so strong. You've seen the matchup with Cedric Alexander. That spear, seconds into the match, with such ferocity, and the velocity of that spear in itself, you just love to see it. Braun Breaker, a surefire main eventer, a world champion in the making, and at this rate, you can already predict he'll be in the Hall of Fame one day. Between him and Carmelo, this next crop of young stars, we're in good hands, and I look forward to see what they do with him. Of course, they're introducing him with these squash matches, these really quick, one and done matches, because you want to get accustomed to his moveset. You want to be able to gain enough confidence and interest in the character so that when it's finally time for him to have a competitive feud against one of the top stars, now he has that equity build with the audience. So I'm curious to see who are they going to have him feud with early on, and why? What's the reason? Is it because he's going to be mowing down so many opponents? You're going to have some heel come up to him and say, hey, you need to be humbled because you've been mowing down all these other nobodies? I mean, I don't know. But again, you trust the process. And speaking of process, look at how the women's division has been piling up over the last couple months with new faces like a Kiana James, as I mentioned, but I would be remiss to not mention Tiffany Stratton, who's basically thrown herself into the world title picture, as they've just confirmed it will be a triple threat match at the Backlash event between Naomi, Bayley, and Tiffany Stratton. Now, I do anticipate that Bayley will retain the title, but to see the improvements that Tiffany Stratton in the last 2 years has made, not only during her time in NXT, but on her short time on Friday Night SmackDown as well. To see that growth, to see her involvement, and not only that, but the fan support that has been building over the course of these last few months. I think Tiffany Stratton, like a Carmelo Hayes, like a Braun Breaker, is someone to keep an eye on, someone to get invested in, because she will certainly help lead the women's division for years to come. And with that said, we go into the main event. Cody Rhodes, the face of WWE right now as the undisputed WWE champion, would be challenged by Carmelo Hayes, the future face, possibly, of Friday Night SmackDown, in what was a fun, competitive matchup, something fresh, something new, certainly something I didn't anticipate seeing on an episode of Friday Night SmackDown. But the one takeaway from this matchup, I thought, was the finish. You saw this moment where Carmelo Hayes and Cody Rhodes both battle it out. They stand up and they run against opposite sides of the rings, catapulting themselves off of the ropes. What it looked like was Carmelo Hayes was going to go for some kind of cross-body maneuver and have perhaps Cody Rhodes meet him with a Cody cutter, but it didn't land. And one thing many people noticed was the fall of Cody Rhodes and how he landed on his shoulder. Now, I hope obviously he was just working an angle and not really messed up that shoulder, because that would be a real shame to see him on such a random episode of Friday Night SmackDown injure himself for a random spot like that. But of course, you have to give them credit for trying something new. Carmelo Hayes, unfazed by the loss, will be fine. I look forward to his first feud and his first set of matches on Friday Night SmackDown, but ultimately leading into Backlash, the story is Cody Rhodes versus AJ Styles, and they haven't really been building much of it. All we had was a face-off and this contract signing, and of course another face-off this upcoming week on Friday Night SmackDown. But it's one of those matches that you don't necessarily need to build a lot of story. All you need to know is Cody Rhodes is the WWE champion as of right now. He is the face of the company. He is the biggest babyface, arguably, in professional wrestling, and he's going toe-to-toe with arguably the best of this generation, AJ Styles, who many, including The Undertaker recently, have complimented him as being the Shawn Michaels of this generation. Now, of course, there's other names out there who I believe should get some credit and should get some acknowledgement. Guys like a Bryan Danielson, guys like a Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, just to name a few. But you look at the longevity of his career. Over the course of these last 24 years, the resume that an AJ Styles has been able to build, the amount of names and the talent that he has had in the ring against him, second to none. You're talking guys like a Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett. And that's only for the first few set of years, because then you add other guys that jumped over to TNA, like a Rob Van Dam, like a Sting. And on top of that, all the names that he would face in Japan for the IWGP Championship, notably like a Shinsuke Nakamura. Then WWE, and that's a whole plethora of names that I'm sure you're familiar with, like a Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, just to name a few. The Undertaker at WrestleMania, Edge, Rey Mysterio, so many names. The amount of talent that he has, not only in himself, but that he's faced one-on-one with in the ring, like I mentioned, second to none. We are in store for what I hope to be a successful event in Backlash in France, as well as a matchup between Cody Rhodes and AJ Styles. But who do you guys think will emerge victorious? I think obviously the pick is Cody Rhodes. So with that being said, how about the question be, how long do you think Cody Rhodes reigns as the WWE champion? And if you had to make a pick as to who is going to dethrone Cody Rhodes, sound off in the comments below. But with that being said, guys, go ahead, if you enjoyed this little wrestle talk with me, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the channel as we continue to try to grow it to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, creating a bigger and better J area for all of us to talk about pro wrestling here on YouTube.